If you've built a lot of models before, you eventually hit a point of catching the redundancies, i.e. you catch a case of the been there, done that. And if that's the case, and you're looking for something that is going to put a little bit of new extra life and breath into your collection, one ace in the hole that works every single time, build something interwar. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with another model showcase video for this 1/35th scale British A1E1 Independent heavy tank. The model in this video is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, as I often mention in these videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. The model that you see here is built out of the box. Literally no modifications were made to it outside of a few repairs and tweaks here or there, but other than that, what you see is exactly what the kit gives you. In this video, we're going to be going over the base starter kit, reviewing the original contents, as well as going over the construction, as well as other areas of this build to watch out for. So there's going to be a bunch of content coming right at you. With that in mind, just sit back and relax. To kick this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this vehicle here is the Vickers A1E1 Independent heavy tank. The vehicle was an experimental British heavy tank that was designed by the Vickers company in the interwar period after World War I and before, of course, World War II. The vehicle is very distinctive of two factors. One, its overall large size, and the second is its multi-turret type design. The tank itself has its origins in the early 1920s. Of course, this is right after World War I. The British Army just came out of that war with the tanks that they used during that time. And they wanted to design a new tank that was going to incorporate many of the lessons learned from the previous war and also with the way the previous tanks were utilized. One of the specifics that this vehicle had in mind was to cross very large trenches. And to do this, you need to have a vehicle that is quite substantially long. What's interesting, though, about the Independence design is that this breaks away from the designs that came before that utilize the rhomboidal shape. If we look at all of the World War I Allied vehicles, or I should say the British ones specifically of the period, they were mostly using a rhomboidal tank design that had a track that even ran along the top sponson sections of the hull. There was no turret, and everything armament-wise was located on sponsons found on the sides. The Independent was one of the first British tank designs that really moved away from that, where we now have a track that no longer goes the entire exterior portion of the vehicle, and also a vehicle that now has turrets on them. In this case, it had several. The main turret was going to feature the main armament, which would have been a cannon, and then the remaining turrets were going to utilize MGs. The first and one and only pilot vehicle was produced by the Vickers company in 1925 and was shown to the British Army. The vehicle weighed in at 33 tons and utilized a crew of 8. In total dimensions, the vehicle had a length of 24 feet and a width of about 8 feet, and also it was 8 feet standing in height. For its main armament, the vehicle utilized a QF 3-pounder 47mm gun, and for the secondary armament, it utilized 4 303 Vickers MGs. These were the water-cooled variants, and also they had to have a special armor protection shielding the water jackets on all of these units. To propel this vehicle, it utilized a V12 gasoline engine from Armstrong Siddeley Company, and the vehicle actually came in at a blistering 20 miles an hour. This doesn't seem like much, however, if we compare and contrast that to the vehicles that came beforehand, this was at least double the speed. The vehicle was also testing out a new hydraulic braking system, among several other new technologies. Although the vehicle was never actually adopted or entered service, the vehicle was used for extensive testing of new technologies up until the early World War II timeframe. At that point there, the vehicle was labeled as obsolete and eventually was just put into storage. The vehicle still remains with us today and is actually housed in the Bovington Tank Museum and has been there ever since. Probably one of the most interesting aspects of the Independence history and story, though, is that apparently there was some espionage going on, and supposedly the plans for this vehicle wound up in the Soviet Union, and people theorized that perhaps it was the Independent that gave the inspiration for the Russian heavy tanks that also had a multi-turret assembly, like the T-28 and also the T-35. Back where British armor, many design cues from the Independent made its way to other vehicles that came later on in the 1930s and the 1940s timeframe. Specifically, one thing that I personally noticed is the design of the track, which looks very similar to the ones that we see on the Matilda series of tanks. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when this model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/35th scale British A1E1 Independent heavy tank kit from SS Model. And this is a project that I've been eagerly awaiting starting ever since I first came across it about 3 or 4 months ago. SS Model is a relatively new addition to the marketplace. I recently stumbled into their components while on Facebook, of all places. I was on some modeling group, and someone posted one of their kits. And it looked really cool, and that led me down the rabbit hole to stumble into this kit here. SS Model is a company that produces a wide range of military armored vehicle kits from a multitude of different scales, from 172 all the way up to 135. What makes their wares very interesting is the medium. You see, unlike many of the other kits that are made out of injection molded polystyrene or even cast resin, SS Model's kits are all made out of resin 3D print. And this is something that is very interesting to me. Not just is the manufacturing method interesting, but most importantly, so are the vehicle types. SS Model are going out of their way to deliver onto the market vehicles that are just straight up not being done by anyone else in any other medium. And in the past, this isn't anything that's necessarily new. If you grew up in the 1990s building model tank kits, in the wasteland that was that decade, you had other similar type vendors doing the same thing, in fact, to the same type of vehicles. Basically, back then, if the kits weren't made out of polystyrene plastic, they were going to be made out of cast resin. Some notable examples would be CMK, as well as also Accurate Armor, which of course I've done a couple builds on and can be found on this channel. T-28 Super Heavy Tank is one, so is the Porsche VK Hybrid. But they also made the A1E1 kit back in the day in the 1990s. It was one of their more popular kits for good reason. Fast forward to the current era, Accurate Armor is not really a thing anymore, and it's really cool to see these vehicles coming back, but in a different type of format. They're still resin though, but just a different type of resin. Instead of the parts being made out of cast, 3D printing is definitely something that changed the modeling landscape, and it's never going to go back. So this model here was procured off of eBay, and if you're the type of person that doesn't like eBay or refers to it as Evil Bay, well, you're basically screwed, because as far as I know, that's really the only place you're going to be able to track down these kits. These kits, when found, are very affordable and are a fraction of the cost compared to the older school cast resin kits that I referenced before. Back in the day, if you wanted this kit from Accurate Armor, you were looking at about $200 some or $150 some odd dollars. And that was, 1990s money. But these models over here, I paid about $70, which with or without shipping, it's hard to say. But these kits are definitely much more affordable and are basically on a similar cost point compared to some other injection molded plastic kits. As I mentioned before, they have an extensive range of very unique military models, and judging upon how this one turns out, I'm definitely going to start keeping an eye open on this company, because they do have several other kits that I may or may not be interested in picking up. But again, we'll see how this one turns out. So starting with the box art and graphic design, just like many of the other garage kits that I referenced from back in the day, it comes in a similar type format where we have a plain Jane white cardboard box over here. And as for the box art, nothing extravagant, just a CAD drawing of the vehicle in question with a little bit of graphic design over here. And by the way, here goes the SS Model logo. These kits are manufactured and designed in China, and when you purchase these from the vendor, they are shipping them from their Chinese vendor. The kit comes in one box. There is a reason why we have two of them on the table, and I will be touching upon that momentarily, and it's actually very important. But as for the remainder of the graphic design, nothing to be had. Everything is what you see is basically what you get. But it's not what's on the outside of the box, it's what's on the inside. So before I open up the box, you'll see that this one here is currently sitting ajar, and there is a very good reason for that, and it ties back into what I mentioned before with the second package. You see, when the model was ordered, I went through the ordering process, I paid my money, the vendor shipped the model out in very short order, gave me the tracking number, and the thing eventually came in due time. Once I got the box, I was really excited to see what this thing was going to be like in person. Ripped open the packaging, opened it up, only to be greeted with some disappointment. Not, by the way, with the vendor or with the producer of the kit. Far from it. The model came in broken, and this was just due to the luck of the draw and just shipping being shipping. So I went ahead and contacted the vendor. I showed the individual the damage, and they promptly went ahead and reprinted out the damaged items and shipped them in a very short period of time. Within a couple weeks or so, I had the replacement parts on hand, and the customer service was absolutely excellent. Definitely turned this project around from a potential mess to something now that is, again, a great hallmark on the particular vendor, as well as the company itself. So because of that, I carefully just put the parts back in the box, and I wasn't able to close the lid because I didn't want to cause any further damage. And with that, let's go ahead and open the box to see what we got. Okay, so all the components, you'll notice, of course, are 3D printed, and they're 3D printed in this pink resin material, and I have seen this medium used on many other 3D prints that are out there, typically ones found in China from a multitude of different companies. I believe, what was that, Tacom or one of those newer Chinese super kit companies are doing something similar. Even Dragon themselves are re-releasing older kits with 3D printed parts made in a very similar material. So this material is actually very good with detail fidelity, and, you know, it's definitely going to be seen once I get to these parts. So this here, I just want to first mention the damage. This here is the upper hull, actually, and the lower hull. It is one integral printing, which by and large is actually pretty good. But as you can see, this one here suffered quite a bit of damage from the shipper. So here's the component right here. As you can see, several areas are completely shattered, and this thing here is basically worthless. I mean, I guess it could be turned into a wreck, but that's not really a project I have any interest in. So now that you've seen the trashed one, let's go ahead and take a look at the good one. So let me grab the fresh box, open it up. First, I want to say the units are packaged pretty well for what they are. As you can see, it has these styrofoam sections that are used as buffer, and by and large, the model is very well packaged. It's just the luck of the draw that I wound up with a broken one. But again, credit where credit is due. They promptly went ahead and gave me a replacement. And this is what the part would look like fresh from the printer and fresh from the packaging. Normally, it has this base over here with all these cool girder type appendages, which are used for the manufacturing process. I believe this is a dip type 3D printer. And on this one here, you can see that it just busted off during shipping. I still have the remnants right here, but that's not really important anymore. So let me just go ahead and open this thing up. It does have that smell of resin 3D print. I will say that. If anyone's ever dealt with 3D prints before, you'll know what I'm referring to. Everything also comes bagged, like you see over here. And here goes a fresh printing. So note, the upper and lower hulls are integrally printed as one piece. The detailing is excellent. We have some nice finely printed details on the lower hull. You can see all of the axis panels, the rivets, the fasteners. We have the U-shackles right there. We have the headlights with the bulbs molded, or I should say molded, force of habit, integrally printed on. On the upper section over here, you can see the grillwork detailing, the engine deck detailing, fender detailing, as well as also the pilot house detailing. Everything looks absolutely excellent. If the camera can get in focus, I want to show the quality of the prints generally on poorer quality prints, you will have some grain or scan lines, and with this model over here, that is not the case, and the prints are absolutely excellent. Some of the better prints that I've seen, for sure. The model does have all of these girder appendages to it for the manufacturing process. This is something that is going to have to be dealt with by the builder, and with a pair of clean cut snips, you are going to have to amputate these sections off, and you have to do so accordingly. You want to take your time with this because some sections are important and they're parts of detailing, and you don't want to be overzealous with the snipping. Like for instance, on this little detailing that we have right over here, this is something that could accidentally be snipped off if the person isn't paying attention. In addition to the bottom detail, or I should say the bottom strut conduit type setup that we have here, you also have some other supports found here on the top. These are not handrails. These are part of the printing process and need to go. And you also have several more on the inside. Obviously, the ones on the inside can be a little bit more robust about it with your finger. Just go in there and probably just bust everything loose, but that is something to keep in mind. We also have the idler tension details right there. Again, fantastic prints for what this is. Excellent. On the back here, we have what looks like knockout marks, which is pretty cool. I think that's probably just a grill of some sort where the printer is designed. So, excellent quality prints. Set this aside carefully. The remainder of the parts are also, again, individually bagged, and they are bubble wrapped, as you can see here. During the unboxing of one of these kits, you want to be very careful with the removal because you could accidentally break something, which is definitely not something you want to do. Alright, so here goes the main turret. Once the camera focuses in, you can see the detailing found on this component right here. And again, same type of quality found on the hull. I love the air blower details. I love that it has its inner detailing present and it's like a hollow component. Very realistic looking. The cupola looks fantastic. We even have the smaller rivet details that are present on that as well. The main armament is a solid print, and this thing cannot elevate or depress, so what you see is what you get. But, you know, again, for the medium, this is really, really good. That's fun. It looks like on the inside here, maybe he was designing that at one point, but decided to abandon it for one reason or another. It's also held in place with these little girders that we saw on the hull. But everything, again, looks to be fantastic quality. The parts, by the way, since they are a resin 3D print on some other resin parts out there, I've seen people who do these things on YouTube, they always have to wash everything to make sure there's no extra resin residue on the surface. And on some other companies out there, the residue is still present on the final production pieces. And on this model here, that's not the case. These pieces appear to be completely clean of any sort of extra resin residue, which is definitely something to note. Another casualty from the shipping are the mini turrets that we have here. These ones are mostly intact. However, I did go ahead and just hedge my bets and had a replacement set made, which you can see right here. And apparently these broke off also during shipping, but these ones fared much better in comparison to the ones on the original model. These ones here come in this cage type setup, which is something that I even do on some of my prints just for manufacturing and shipping purposes. And let's see, let me first go ahead and take all these out of the bag. Okay, so with the parts removed from the bag, here you get to see what they look like right here in my hand. And again, no shocker, same exact quality of prints found on all these components over here. Note the hatch details, has all the hinges, fasteners, all that good stuff is there. And basically the same turret, rinse, washed, and repeated for these three examples. Except for this one here, which is a little bit different. But, you know, this is as per the real vehicle, and the detailing, again, very crisp, and everything is very well thought out. Next runner that was sealed in a bubble wrap bag is this setup that we have here, which appear to be the exhaust manifolds. Just like with the turrets, it is encased in this cage protective setup. Well, a bunch of little protective, or I should say, suspension girders. I'm pretty sure I am pissing off some 3D printing people out there by referring to them as girders. I guess you could call them sprues. I'm not really sure what the appropriate term is, but to me they look like bridge girders, so I'm just going to refer to them as that. Alright, so the manifolds have some excellent detailing on them, so with, again, of course, no surprise. The end sections are drilled out. However, the holes do look a bit small for what these pieces should be generally. This is something I may address with the Dremel, depending on how fragile this material is, of course. This is definitely, by the way, the first time working with an all 3D printed resin kit like this here, and this is something I'll talk upon in more depth as the video goes on. I've done lots of components in similar materials, but never a full kit, so this is definitely a first for me. Another little part in a protective box. No idea what the hell these are. Look like hinges of some sort. I think these are mirrors. I don't know. Honestly, I don't really know this vehicle as well as I do others, but, you know, whatever they are, they appear to be very finely molded. Again, force of habit. Finely printed. And this one has a really nice, strong little containment box for it. It's actually nicely engineered in that regard. This thing could probably survive a drop or two. And this unit here is a component for the main armament. Again, held in a nice little protective little sarcophagus. The armament is hollow, but again, just like with the exhaust, I think it's something that I can improve, make it a little bit more to scale. And this is probably done this way for manufacturing reasons, but we'll see how that pans out. Everything is nice and straight. It's not warped or anything, which is a concern specifically when you have thin objects like this. And this is true for cast resin as well as also 3D print. Sometimes, you know, they might print out skewed or bent or canted for one reason or another. And that's not the case here. The thing is as straight and as true as possible. So that's fantastic. Okay, so this leads us now to the last bit of equipment. And this is something that is awesome and leave some room for improvement at the same time. And this is the components for the main tracks. That appear to be fucking broken. Shit. Okay, jumping forward a few months since the events in the last clip takes us to what we have here. So, as a quick recap, when I was doing the unboxing, happening right then and there, I noticed that there was a severe problem with the printing for the track pontoons. And here we have the part right here. These are the parts I was just about to do the review on, or at least that's what appears with the magic of editing, and here go the components. So just like with many of the other parts, everything is of course integrally 3D printed as a single printing, and normally this is something that's pretty good. However, unfortunately, this piece here did suffer some damage along with the upper hull and the turret parts that I mentioned before. And if I bring the camera to this section over here, you will see a nice little chip right there on a really precarious location on the model. So with the track link over here, section chipped away, this really sucks because obviously it's on the outside and it's very visible. So basically this one little chip here negates everything found on this sprue, and this thing here is just basically scrap resin, sadly. But before anyone is going to be angry at the company or say, oh, this is really poor reflecting of the company itself, one thing I have to give a tremendous shout out for is right after I saw that the thing was chipped, I immediately reached out and contacted the company and the vendor that sold me this part. So right after I noticed the issue in the previous scene, I went ahead and reached out to the vendor. And keep in mind, the vendor, I already reached out to at that point about a month earlier regards to the broken upper hull and the tard parts to which they sent. And, you know, it was an eBay auction. I already left my positive feedback and everything. And the guy could have literally have said, "New phone, who's this?" And that would have been all she wrote. However, I can't give this company and this particular vendor a shout out more than I possibly can, because I reached out to him, sent him the pictures of the broken piece, and the guy said, "Sure thing, bro." And next thing I know, we had a replacement set promptly sent. Even though at the time of filming this is currently August, and I started filming this scene, or I should say this model, back in I believe May or June, but it has nothing to do with the vendor. That's me with just how things fit into my filming scheduling. And here we are, fast forward a little time later, and we have the replacement parts right here in this box. So let's go ahead and unbox what the parts are supposed to be like in their proper order, or at least I hope they are. No, they are. I did test them, or I checked them out when the box first came in. So here's the box, and then we're talking about that. And here go the parts sealed in their little bubble wrap envelope. With the parts removed from the bubble wrap, let's go ahead and open up from the Ziploc bag. And here we are. Obviously, they're made with the same reddish terracotta looking like 3D printed resin as the other ones, or like kind of close. This one here is more of a pink hue to it than this one, but regardless, it's the same material. And as I was going to originally mention in the previous scene that was filmed all that while ago, the units are again a single printing. Yep, tracks are in perfect shape. And this means that we have the complexities of the side pontoon, the suspension, the return rollers, the hatch, even the little ladder here, all integrally printed, along with the sprocket, the idler, and most importantly, the track. And as I mentioned before, in my opinion, this is a feature that is a double-edged sword, really. It's good in a way in that it is as simple as one can possibly make something that's this complex and ornate, right? I mean, there are a bazillion little parts in here that the builder doesn't have to worry about. It's all integrally printed as a single unit, so that's great. However, the one area where it could turn around and bite you is with the paintwork. And this is something that is actually probably going to be the most difficult aspect of this entire model to contend with. You see, when you're building a tank, and this is true for all tanks, specifically the World War II German ones, but all tanks in general, the suspension is where the most amount of complexity lies. And when you have a lot of structure like this, with the track added in place, trying to get the paint into the appropriate locations is always going to be a challenge. And this is true for just getting the green and the base coat onto some of the areas on the suspension, but also if you paint the track. Now, this is where a lot of people like to work on individual Lincoln Link tracks, where they assemble them in this type of format, and then, you know, they paint the model and, you know, complete it. And some people even do it with single piece vinyls. And honestly, I think that is a ridiculously horrible way to build these models. Because you will, keyword will, have areas where paint is going to be missed. And you will, you know, be looking at your model, you'll hit a certain angle, bang, you're going to have to see bare naked plastic, or in this case, resin showing through. Also, trying to get into here and paint every little area of these tracks, that's going to be hard. Like, really, 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 really hard to do. So yeah, that's one thing. Again, it always blows my mind when I see people who build models and they build it all complete like this and then they paint it. You're gonna have missed paint areas. You're really doing it the hard way. Like, I don't know why you want to play this on hard mode, but there we are. A lot of people like to do it that way. And again, I said before, that's a horrible way to build model tanks. That is a hill I will die on, along with saying Lincoln Link tracks are cancer. But regardless, so for this one here, this is going to be the biggest challenge of the build. Hopefully I should be able to navigate it. I think I should be able to you know, go accordingly. And as the video goes on, I already have an idea how to paint and weather everything, and how to do so in a way that doesn't leave for miss, or minimize as much as possible mispainting areas. But we'll, you know, touch upon that as the video goes on. Regardless, as you can see, the piece is a single printing. It does have a slight bow to it, it appears, as you can see. This is something that I can see if I could work with. I believe if I hit this with a heat gun evenly, I should be able to bend this back to shape if it's that bad. But we'll see how that pans out. One thing, again, one positive attribute is that because it's single printing, you know, mounting it to the side of the hull is going to be really, really easy. And here's the busted one that we have here. So yeah, it just basically plugs in place, and I'm trying to figure out the orientation. It just basically plugs in place as one complete unit. So that is, you know, good. But again, that single piece track thing, it's just going to make finishing the model just a little bit more challenging. In fact, it's probably going to be the most challenging aspect of the entire build, from what I can see here. But regardless, you know, let's go ahead with you know, full steam ahead to see exactly how does this thing actually go together. So to start off with the build, the first thing I'm going to do is to remove the track pontoons from the backing. And one thing I noticed is that the piece is slightly curved, as you can see here. This is something that I've seen in the past with cast resin parts, but it's also the case with many resin 3D printed parts. But fortunately, to adjust this, basically it's the exact same procedure as one that you would do with cast resin. So to do this is a somewhat risky procedure. So this is, you know, something of a more advanced type skill set. And as a side note, usually when I talk about in videos, you know, a full resin kit or resin conversion kit, and I generally say that those are meant for, you know, people that have some more advanced skill sets outside of, you know, plastic, you know, polystyrene kit building. This is the type of stuff I'm referring to. So to do this procedure, I'm going to be utilizing my heat gun right over here, and basically I'm going to evenly heat the surfaces, and then I'm just going to go ahead and try to flatten it like you see here. One advantage about resin type material is that it is susceptible to heat, and when it is heated up to a certain point, it does become very malleable, and when that happens, you could, you know, move it and adjust it accordingly. After a certain point, once I have the unit flattened, I'm just going to quickly douse it by throwing some water onto the parts over here, much along the lines as you would quench something that you heat up that's made out of metal, and, you know, you did a little bit of blacksmithing. So it's very similar in concept. The trick is you have to hit it evenly. And you don't want to focus on one certain location, because that could actually cause some detrimental effects. Like I said before, it's a very, very risky procedure, but hopefully I should have enough skill sets in this to take care of the job. There we go. Let that cool off for a little bit. And after the procedure is done, you can see that the piece is much more straightened compared to the way we had it originally. So from here, it's ready to remove off of the backing. So to remove it off the backing, this is a bit different compared to every other plastic model kit out there, where generally you go in here with a pair of clean cut snips like this, and, you know, you remove the thing accordingly, and then up the piece pops off. For this one here, it's not really going to work. As you can see, there's quite a bit of little columns here. It kind of reminds me of a large pier, so there's a lot of self-supporting structures that need to be cut away. So clean cut snip is not going to do the job. Instead, I'm going to utilize a tool that's generally not one that's seen in my 1/35 scale videos, and something seen in my 1/6 scale videos, and at times in my 1/16s. And that is the oscillator, or in this case, a old school Dremel Multimax. This is the tool that's perfect for the job, specifically with the half moon blade, because you can go ahead and actually have plenty of reach to reach all of the areas that need to be deburred, or I should say destemmed, which will allow the unit to be cleanly cut off of the backing. If you do not have a tool like this, you're not going to really be able to do this any other clean, efficient way. It's going to be a bit of a mess. So just go to Harbor Freight, pick up an oscillator like this one here. You know, these days these things are pretty cheap, and they are very effective. And it's also an awesome tool to have on hand for other projects. The only caveat is that you want to have a nice fresh blade, as I literally just replaced the one that I've had on here since, what, like 2009 or so. So yeah, that thing definitely has been worn out thoroughly. And this one here should make short work of the resin found on the 3D print. But before I go ahead and utilize the tool, I am going to take my clean cut snips here, and I'm going to make short work of the supports that hold up this ladder. This is something that looks to be pretty frail, and I would feel more comfortable deleting the supports that hold it up at this time here, so it'll just cause potentially less stress when it comes time for the actual cutting. So these pieces here are in reach of my clean cut. I don't have to cut it exactly to the part that needs to be removed. I just want to remove it from the making contact with the base, which again will make the removal less stressful. Okay, so that's been taken care of. Now we could do the actual removal cut. Okay, so you see it did really short work of the ones that I was able to reach. Unfortunately, I am going to probably have to cut this guy in half because I just can't get a long enough reach. Or maybe I'll go ahead and change the blade. Hang on, let me see if I have another one of these. Okay, so I replaced it with this blade over here. It's much longer than the other one, as you can see. Although the cutting edge is a little bit more blunter compared to the other one. So let's see how this goes. Alright, that worked like a charm. Worked better than I thought, actually. So, yeah, those are quite a number of support struts. So it's a good thing I cut off those sections earlier. As you can see, it was really, really, something that could have potentially damaged these sections over here. So it was a smart idea to do what I did. Alright, let me go ahead and carefully set this guy aside and do the same thing to the other one. Ta-da! It's all done. So, this guy here can be put into the trash or the recycle bin or whatever. Nah, I think it's just trash. I don't know, I might be able to recycle this material for something else. Another project. Who knows? Regardless, it's no longer relevant for this video. So, with that out of the way, now I am actually ready to start the actual construction of this model. So the next component I want to go over is the hull printing. Obviously this is a substantial bit of material and it needs to be deburred. For this one here, I'm going to utilize the multi-master as well because just of how many little strands there are. For this one, I'm going to use that just to amputate it from the bottom portion, and then I could hopefully be able to go in and carefully and surgically remove every one of the support struts by hand with the clean cut snip. So let's go ahead and go over this. You notice I rest the piece on the table because it helps mitigate some of the vibrations, which can potentially break things. Okay. Coming really to the end of the road here. Alright, so that's been taken care of. All right, perfect. So as you can see, doing a model like this, a Dremel with the router bit is also going to come in very handy. In fact, this is exactly how it was used to clean up the inside portion here. And if we can recall, it originally looked like this. So if you're getting one of these kits, router bits, definitely something to look into. After the unit is removed, it's then time to begin the cleanup. As you can see, fresh from the sprue section, this thing is a pin cushion with tons of these little support stems that are required for the 3D printing process. Obviously, these all need to go. Here you get to see the reverse side where this cleanup was already concluded. So you have a few ways to do this. Some people would recommend going there with a clean cut snip, to which I gotta say good luck with that. I mean, I guess you could do it, but if you have any sanity left afterwards, let me know. Another way to do it is one that's more practical and more mechanical. So I'm going to utilize my Dremel, and I have here my router bit. This is a 2.40 millimeter bit. These are purchased from the usual vendor that I always reference in these videos on where I get my micro Dremel bits and router bits from. And they can be found right here listed below, is also in the video description. Turn this on. I'm basically just going to bump into everything. With the way these router bits are, they just make short work of this type of a procedure. So I like to start with this straight away first, and then from there I could go into the inner wheel areas. But as you can see, the little stems do not stand a chance. Where you gotta be real careful is in these areas between the wheels. You don't want to make contact with the wheels. You just want to make contact with the pieces themselves. If you really need to get into a really tight space and you're not feeling comfortable with this size bit, they have smaller router bits, which would probably be better for certain applications. These sprocket areas are really, really tight. It's easier for me to do that off camera, so I'll go ahead and do that at that point, but I could go ahead and clean up the remainder sections while I have you all on video. Looks like I was still able to do the sprocket regardless. So there you go. Much, much better compared to the way we had it before. The other thing I want to mention is that I'm going to change the bit here to a high-speed removal bit in a second, because on the little top rollers over here, we have these little stems that are integrally printed on, and these need to go just so that the pieces can plug in better onto these sections on the hull. But before I do, one thing I am going to do is I am going to go ahead and slightly widen the holes on the side hull here. This side here, I went ahead and made the adjustments, and by doing so, these side sections were able to plug on in a much more easily done manner. I tried fiddling it before and it just was slightly off. It's like the holes were lining up, but they were just slightly off. That's probably due to possible any warpages on the prints themselves, or I don't think there's any shrinkages. That's not really a thing with prints, but still, you know, the holes were close, very close. Just a little, you know, tweaking here or there is really all that was required. So for this one here, I'm just going to go ahead and preemptively take care of that. Okay, with those adjusted, I'm going to just run the high-speed removal bit up and down these surfaces over here just to smooth them out. Even though it's not required at all, it's the intersection, you're definitely not going to see it. It's just bugging me, so I'm going to go ahead and take care of that. Okay, I can see on this one there's still a slight little bend to it. I'm going to go ahead and take care of that with the heat gun method that I showed before, and that should be able to straighten and torque it out to its final endpoint. So after a little bit of hand fitting, boom, I was able to get the pieces to fit in their appropriate locations. So let me go ahead and pop them off, because right now they are not glued to the side. If anything, these are going to be the very last things that get glued to the model after everything is fully painted and weathered, for reasons that, well, should be fairly obvious once I go ahead and remove them. So they're just plugged in place. Before I go ahead and mention that, here you get to see the amount of material that was removed in order just to get the piece to line up. Again, all done with the router bit. Did a pretty easy job of it. For here, I did have a bit of a snafu. I over-drilled on this one, and I had a little bit of a chip over here. Not a problem. This is easily going to be patched up with a little bit of body filler and some red putty, and then everything will just look seamless and you know, flawless once the build progresses past this point. So, like I said before, the reason why I am going to go ahead and paint these units, or I should say install them after the thing is painted, is, well, did the paint work? This here is a nightmare to try to paint when it's secured to the model, okay? So this is similar to like what I say in those videos where I'm doing an OTR and I have, you know, the wheels that are permanently glued on. Or also, this is actually more along the lines of the SG 1/72 scale tanks that have the individual link and length. And I mentioned, you know, I assemble them into a pontoon type format like this, and then it's a single piece and it gets glued on in place. And just like in those other videos, I always mention that when you have the things as a solid piece and they're on the model, trying to get everything thoroughly painted is going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible. And those are on those builds. This build here, it's 10 times as worse. You're going to have to try to get in here and paint the row wheels and make sure that they look different from the track and weather everything accordingly. That's not going to be easy. That's actually going to be probably the biggest challenge of this build thus far. Then on the inner portions over here, yeah, you know, there's a lot of nooks and crannies over here that are just going to be missed with the primer and the base coat. And it's one of those things where it's hard for the paint to get access to it, but for somehow you will still see it when you're looking at the model in a certain angle or two. So in order to thoroughly paint the model, I am going to go ahead and make sure everything is thoroughly painted and weathered, and basically the piece is going to be thoroughly completed just before the things get fitted in place. So that's how I'm going to go ahead and take care of that. The other thing I'm going to mention at this time is I'm going to need to do a little bit of scratch building. And that has to do with this rear wheel that we have here. Well, that's the front wheel. Here's the rear wheel. Same as the front one. Okay, there's what it looks like on the inside and the outside. Excellent little bit of detailing. Looks great. Fortunately, for one reason or another, this one here, it's a bit, well, demented. So here's the front wheel. It looks great. But the rear one, just, I don't know what happened, if it was just a misprint or whatever, but you can see that it has no detailing on the surface. The geometry is nothing like the other one, and it's just like a thin, flimsy little plate. So that's something that's going to be addressed. On the inner portion over here, the whole back section just like flaked away. It wasn't even there. It looked like a potato chip, basically. It was thin as one. And we just have the inner remnants left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to fabricate a new one. I feel comfortable on doing that. I'm going to go ahead and amputate this here with a Dremel with the router bit as well as the high-speed removal bit. Just carefully removing, can't stress that enough, just enough material over here for the shards to fall away. And then I can fabricate 2 brand new wheels. So the wheels are fairly easily fabricated. I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way on my lathe, where I'll turn resin down into the same shape, and I should be able to just glue everything in place when the time comes. So that is something that is going to be on my to-do list with this project over here. But that aside, everything else is looking great, and I could just, at this point here, really just progress with the remainder of the build, as the wheel I could take care of any time between now and when the unit's ready for painting. And after not a whole lot of time, here we have the model fully assembled, and at this point here, it's actually ready for painting. The one aspect of this build that I'm probably going to be repeating over and over again, it's going to be the overlying theme of this video, is just how ridiculously fast this model is to build. It's also somewhat easy, granted if you have the skill set and the tools, but that's something I could circle back to later. Let's go back to what we have right here. So, as I mentioned before, originally there was a wheel that needed to have been replaced, and the wheel has been fabricated and fitted at this time. At the moment, the model is just temporarily being held together with rubber bands. That is because these sections are not yet glued on. Of course, I'm going to install them after the thing is fully painted and weathered, but this is just to get a good idea on what the unit looks like assembled, and if I do not have the rubber bands in place, the pieces are going to want to tend to walk and fall apart, and that could potentially lead to some problems. So we're just going to leave the rubber bands on for the moment that we have now. So, looks pretty good. As I stated before, here goes the replaced wheel. Now, like I stated a bit earlier, I was originally going to make one of these with the traditional fabrication method of being cast resin that was turned in the lathe, but then I realized why? When I could actually do a better job and mimic it more precisely if I just go ahead and render it in CAD and have it 3D printed. And I guess me with entering into my older ages now, I'm getting more and more inclined to go with that route as opposed to doing it the old-fashioned way. I still know how to use a lathe and all that stuff, but the 3D print just makes it so much more convenient. So here you can see the replaced 3D printed wheel compared with the original. And as you can see, it is a dead ringer for the version found on the model. It'll more than pass once the unit is fully painted and weathered. If I flip the model over, you can see how it interacts with the inner portion here. And again, it lines up absolutely perfectly. And if I never mentioned anything, no one would have ever noticed. Going up from the wheel takes it to some of the other components, namely the exhaust manifolds. These were separate items that need to have been removed off of their sprues, then fitted in place. The pieces are very easily lined up. With the way the kit is designed, you don't really have an instruction sheet per se, but fortunately with this model here being so simplistic as it is, you basically you could figure out where the parts go at an early quick glance. And with the exhaust manifolds, these were, again, just removed off of the sprue and then mounted to their appropriate locations. The sprue removal was done again with the Multimax. Matter of fact, the Multimax or Multimaster or any type of an oscillating tool is going to be probably the most important tool you can be equipped with in order to tackle a kit like this, which is definitely not something that is generally said about 1/35th scale models. Generally, when you talking about Multimax or Multimaster type procedures, this is on models like in 1/16 scale and definitely in 1/6. 1/35, not so much. And also, most 1/35th scale builders don't exactly have an oscillator or need to have an oscillator in their toolbox. But for this kit over here, again, made very short work of the removal, as we saw with the other sections that were shown on the video earlier. The other thing to mention about the parts that were removed is that you do have these tiny little sections poking out from where the support columns were originally connecting, and these do need to be polished away. This is basically the most amount of bodywork that needs to be done on the model. And with the camera brought in closer, you should not see any sort of protrusions or anything along those lines on these surfaces over here, and the surfaces are nice and smooth, and this is exactly what you're looking for. This is just done with some fine 220 grit sandpaper, and I basically just go over these surfaces over here briefly and evenly just to make sure everything polishes down. With the type of resin that this stuff is printed in, it does polish away very, very quickly, and again, mostly effortlessly. As long as the sandpaper is fresh, of course, which it should be. The parts is glued directly in place. Super glue bonds to this stuff like a dream, and basically it's very similar again to working with those old cast resin kits that I mentioned earlier from the 1990s, or even when I work with my own cast resin detail components for the various models that I work in. But again, if you're one of those builders out there that uses, God forbid, red tube model glue, which I don't know why you would even consider that to be relevant, or even if you use the standard plastic cements, those are not going to be sufficient at gluing and assembling one of these models together, and you will need to use super glue. This is a super glue model. I mean, I would argue all models are super glue models, but this one here, definitely one that you need to use exclusively super glue with. Outside of that, the turret over here. With the way the thing was printed, again, this side here on the rear section, we had all those support columns, and this is where things become a bit interesting because with the way the turret's details are, we have lots of riveting details in these sections over here, and when you remove the turret off of the support sprue, you will have all those little protrusions in place, and they can easily blend in with the integrally printed on riveting. So this is something that you have to pay attention to. You can be overzealous and accidentally polish away legit detailing that is required and would be found on the real unit. Fortunately, it's pretty easy to see which ones are the real rivets and which ones are not. The turret does have a certain format to it with the riveting, so you just got to bear that in mind, but you do want to stay on the ball, and this is probably one of the aspects of the build that you really want to pay attention to. Outside of that, it polishes down just like the exhaust, like I mentioned before. Also on the exhaust, while I have it right here, you can see these other little rivets. These are details and do not want to be polished down, so that's definitely another thing you want to keep in mind if/when you are working on one of these kits. Another thing I do want to reference is with the front portion over here, we have these two little support ladders, or I guess they're footman type loops. And what's unique is, I believe there are 2 generations of these kits. The original printing that I have did not have these or the headlights integrally printed on. They were actually a separate component. However, when I had the new replacement hull sent in, it had both the headlights and also a portion of these stems integrally printed on. However, the footsteps over here were missing the little pad itself, and I believe this is intended for you to go off on your own and to scratch build that out of a little piece of plastic in order to get the detailing. Basically, just glue it on and call it a day. Now, that's for what I was basically able to just guesstimate from looking at the sprue parts. Regardless, since I had the runner on hand with these proper parts on them, I simply amputated the original ones. As you can see, there's little remnants of the sanding that was done, and then I just mounted the new ones directly in place. They fit directly on without any sort of mods being needed to be made to the part itself. The only mod is you do have to amputate the piece off of the model, but you know, if you take your time, if you have the appropriate technique and tools, you should be able to do the job. One thing I like is that these ones here are fully detailed, and they even have their bottom details integrally rendered on. So again, by going with these ones here, it definitely makes for a better build in my opinion. Now, I'm not sure which generation is which, if this is an older unit or if this is the newer unit. Hard to say, but I do know that there are 2 options out there in regards to the headlights and with these footsteps. Obviously, this one here with the headlights and the footsteps are already printed in place. It does simplify the build a little bit because it's, you know, less part count that you have to worry about. The other thing I do want to mention is a little bit of a repair. You'll see that on this section over here, there is a grab handle that has been fabricated out of some metal. Originally, it had the piece integrally printed on, but it broke off at some point in time. I believe it even came in this condition. No point sweating about it. I just simply made a new one out of wire, bent it to the same shape and size as the others, and then glued it in place. Once it's painted and weathered, it'll just blend right in. Circling back to the wheel, let me go ahead and temporarily take off. Don't worry, turret is A-okay. So now let me carefully remove the other parts. The other thing I do want to mention about the turrets is that they are not held on with any sort of locking type system. I may have mentioned that before. They just simply slip on in place and are held in place with friction. Not exactly the best type of mounting system as I generally mention in these type of videos, but unlike some of the other models where I'm able to come up with some kind of a locking system, with this one here, that's not really going to be possible or feasible. But for this one here, once I have some layers of paint built up, that should be enough, specifically with the varnish, to add a bit more extra friction, and it should keep the parts in place a bit better compared to the left in the raw condition that we have here. But regardless, let me go ahead and continue with the removal of the rubber bands. With the rubber bands removed, I could remove this side pontoon, and here you get to see the wheel in better light. Specifically when I flip it to the opposite side. So this here is a resin 3D print. This I had printed by another vendor that I use frequently. I usually use this guy for some smaller run items, and for this one here, it was perfectly suffice. So this one here is actually a multi-part assembly. It's actually 3 components just because to better optimize it for his printer, as opposed to printing it as a single unit as I've done on several other components that are actually listed on the ECA catalog. This item here is not going to be, or actually I was on the fence about listing it or not on the ECA catalog, specifically on the ECA Shapeways store, because it is 1/35 scale. Obviously, this is a niche item of a niche item of a niche item, and it's Not exactly something that I see a whole lot of people clamoring for, but, you know, since I have the CAD files on hand, I might as well do something with them. So if you are in a position where you need this wheel, either for this kit or if you're scratch building one or something similar, I actually have a set of these listed on the ECA Shapeways store. The set contains 4 wheels, enough to equip 1 independent tank. They are resin HE 3D print, and unlike this one over here, they are a single print. Now, what's interesting about the wheel is that it's actually a little bit more complex than it looks, because we have the 2 dishes, one for the inside, one for the outside, but we also have on the inside what appears to be a faux tooth ring sprocket. Hopefully that comes out in better light, but basically the way the independent wheel is, it's kind of like a little mini sprocket in that it has guide teeth on the inside and it interlocks in between the teeth on the track. This is something that is seen on a few other tanks out there, specifically from this era, and it was a unique piece of detailing, and it's because that little sprocket mechanism why I didn't want to make this the old-fashioned way. It's one of those things where I could have fudged it, but it just would have bugged me, you know? It's one of those things I would look at in a certain light, like, it's missing the little gear ring. I know, say what you want about that, but it was something that I had the opportunity to replicate since I had the other one over here, and I simply just rendered it out on the computer. Regardless, this is found via the link listed below on the ECA Shapeways store, along with all the other smaller scale ECA 3D printed items from 1/35 scale to 1/48 scale, and even I have some 1/76 and 1/72 scale items on that catalog page. It always seems to grow as I build more models and need more parts as time goes on, so that's something to keep an eye on. Regardless, that's there in case anybody needs one. I'm not predicting this thing to be a hot seller, but hey, why not? You miss every shot you don't take. Regardless, you can see again how much everything just blends right in. Fortunately, the piece doesn't have to work. It just gets glued directly in the exact same location where the original one was. And with the way the printing was, there were some like remnants left as like an artifact showing exactly where the wheel was, or where the original wheel was. So this one here just basically slipped and locked directly in place, giving you for the end result that we see here. This, of course, will look much better once everything is painted and weathered, and it doesn't have that kind of cool looking C-3PO look where we have different mixed match parts. One final thing I do want to mention involves the bodywork that we have right here on the lower hull. As I mentioned before, there was a bit of a chip, and I over-drilled slightly into this section when I was boring out the holes, but I was able to take care of it with the bodywork, as I mentioned before. The little piece that was chipped off was found. I glued it back in place, threw some thick super glue over it. After a couple layers, I went ahead and polished it out with sandpaper, leaving for the end result that we have here. For the hole, this was plugged up with some scrap runner that I had in my recycle bin, snipped it off, glued it in place as a backing, and then the putty was added and sanded away to the smooth format that you see presently. The other bodywork to mention on the hull is down over here. Again, this is where we had those little protrusions sticking out from the bottom base that the thing was originally printed on, and then that was addressed. And also the tin work here had the same effect. On the tin work, they look like rivets, so you may be hesitant to remove those, but rest assured they are not rivets. They are just remnants from the columns that act as support, so they do need to be polished away. Again, with this material over here, 220 grit sandpaper, and the stuff polishes down and sands like a dream. And here's the build coming to the end of its construction cycle. At this point here, the paintwork is basically completed. The weathering has also just been wrapped up, and I'm ready to install the side sections of the suspension to the model, and then it can progress into the very last painting stages, which would include the varnishing and other things that come afterwards. However, it's at this point here that I really wanted to take time to mention again the side sections, because as I've stated already in this video, it's going to be something I'm going to be harking on for a little bit afterwards, but the entire build is really the suspension. This is the heart of the build, and this is the biggest challenge on the entire project, be it from removing it off of the printing station, as well as also getting everything thoroughly painted. This, again, is why I went ahead and painted everything off of the model, because it gives you the best chance possible to get everything successfully painted. And now that everything's in this position over here, I could go ahead and bring the camera in closer so you get to really appreciate the sections fully painted in their final form prior to getting installed onto the remainder of the hull. With the camera readjusted, here you get a better view of the tracks in question. So, as you can see, everything is thoroughly painted and weathered. and it's ready for installation to the model. Like I mentioned before, the biggest challenge on the build itself, painting-wise, was to make sure that everything was thoroughly painted with the appropriate color and also weathered with the appropriate format. And this is something that is usually really easily done, specifically when the model's tracks are separate from the model, as well as also in some cases even the wheels. But on this build over here, that's just not the case, with, again, everything being a single printing. So with everything off of the model's hull, this gave me the best chance possible to thoroughly paint everything appropriately. In order to paint everything, the way you see it here was, first, of course, everything was primed in flat black spray paint. After the spray paint was done, I went ahead and carefully with a paintbrush painted the inner recesses here of all the road wheels, as well as also the inner portions of the sprocket. Same thing was done on the opposite side as well. Once the hand-painted sections were dried, I thoroughly masked up the tracks on the outer portion as well as a good portion of the side sections, and then I took care of the remainder of the base coat with the airbrush. After the airbrush was completed, I was able to remove the mask, and I was able to deal with any sort of oversprays that remaining. This was done with a little bit of denatured alcohol on a paintbrush, and I was carefully able to wash several of the track sections where the oversprayed was applied. Because the base coat is Tamiya, the denatured alcohol was easily able to take care of that, and since the tracks are spray painted with flat black enamel spray paint, it wasn't going to have any effect on the paint finish found on the tracks themselves. After the base coat was applied and the tape was removed, I then went ahead and the model went through its format with the weathering. It includes, briefly skipping ahead with my usual weathering techniques, which will include airbrushing, dry brushing, as well as also Tamiya panel line accent. I'm definitely going to be circling back later on because it's very relevant for this build. For the weathering of the tracks, this was done with a paintbrush. This was all done with some dry brushing, and I just did my usual format like I've referenced in many of my other videos, namely my MG videos, but it's the same type of format for here because these are all steel tracks. I just went ahead and dry brushed on the silver paint in the format that you see here, and I was able to get the stressed appearance that you see presently. The outer portions was straightforward. The trick was getting it into the inner confines over here and making sure I was able to get to the teeth sections without getting any sort of collateral damage with the paint, and I was pretty lucky with the consistency on the paint. And this is, again, one of those things where we want to have a good paintbrush and also some pretty good consistency on the paint, which will prevent any sort of collateral damage. And once everything was thoroughly painted, it actually looks really, really good. Again, this was probably one of the more difficult aspects of this build, but if you're careful enough and if you're able to navigate the waters appropriately, it definitely goes together, or I should say, everything falls into its appropriate location pretty well. I will say this, though, the job would have been about 4 times harder if these sections were glued onto the model as opposed to in this format over here, because I have full access to get my paintbrushes and the airbrush into the appropriate areas without any sort of other issues. If this was secured to the model, it would have been way, way, way more difficult. Also, with the way everything was thoroughly primed, because everything was off of the model, you will see absolutely no areas where there have been any sort of missed locations of paint. And there's going to be no bare exposed areas of resin remaining that can potentially harm the look of this model. I have seen other builds out there that are similar to this one over here where people tried to paint everything after the model was glued together. And yep, if you look carefully, you will see sections of resin material that are popping through, even through the primer coat. So again, to best avoid that, it's best to do everything in its separate condition like you see here. With the model fully completed, you really get to appreciate all that hard work that I was referencing earlier in this video. So starting with the suspension, and again, this is going to be a recurring theme in this video, as you may have noticed, because this is literally the bulk of the project. The whole project, the whole build, is literally just working with the suspension. So I cannot overstate enough the importance of getting everything thoroughly painted and weathered in order to have the build be completed and be completed in a way that looks great. So starting with the suspension once again, now that everything is glued in place, you really get to appreciate all of the hard work of painting and weathering everything in the manner that I mentioned before. The paint is applied to all of the locations where it's relevant, where all of the track sections are painted with the black and weathered to have that distressed look, while all of the running gear components are painted with the tank's green base coat, and the tires have been painted to look like distressed steel, as these are steel rimmed on the real vehicle. The trickiest part, of course, is getting around the areas where the sprocket tine, where the road wheels make contact with the top portion of the track, and also some other really tight extremities. As I cannot state enough, this is the type of thing where you want to do and paint thoroughly before these units get fitted to the vehicle. If you go ahead and fit these to the vehicle, good luck trying to get these things thoroughly painted and weathered. It's just not going to happen. Also, in this section over here, you get to see the replacement wheels that I referenced earlier in the video, and they look awesome. If we compare that to the one here on the front, which is the original printed on version, you will be hard-pressed to see the difference, and in fact, if I never mentioned it or showed that in this video, you would have never realized that the one in the back is a replacement part. Moving our way to the front, there's nothing really much to mention extra that hasn't been already mentioned before, so we'll just keep it simple. On the headlights, you can see that they have been painted with their silver paint, and I also add a little swipe of Tamiya gloss lacquer to the little bulb sections just to give them a little bit more sheen. On the front portion over here, you get to see the driver's position, which kind of reminds me of an old medieval style Crusader helmet, and the only thing that was done was a little swipe of black were added to the little vision slots, and then a little swipe of gloss lacquer was added just to give it that little reflective look to make it look like the prism glass that would be on the real unit. On the reverse side, on the back, there's nothing really much to mention over here, so let's just move top side. First thing to mention are the exhaust manifolds. They have been painted and weathered. The painting technique that I like to use on my exhausts are the use of Sophisticated Finishes rusting agent, where it is a two-part type mix, where the first it is a iron filing type paint where you brush onto a surface, and once it dries you brush on this activator and it actually forms real rust to grow. I always did like utilizing this stuff on exhaust because it's literally real rust, and something like exhaust manifolds, they do tend to burn off paint and char and rust up pretty quickly, specifically after usage. The heat shields did not get the rusting agent, just to add a little bit more of a color contrast, and also these would not necessarily rust as fast as the actual exhausts themselves. I did go ahead and add some black soot airbrushing to these two areas over here. However, since I finished this model, the rust continues to grow on the piece, and it does look a bit different compared to when I first finished the build. And as you can see, the little black poof sections have kind of been overgrown with rust, much along the lines they do on the real ones. If you ever seen an old exhaust, an old muffler, for instance, you'll know what I'm talking about. Either way, it still looks really great. On the top portion, you get to see the grill work. On the side sections over there, those two round manhole looking like objects, they look really, really cool, really fun to add that panel line accent to it. It really comes out, as well as the grading sections found on the middle section. You could also see that I went ahead and added some drippage over here to what I believe is the fuel filler spouts, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, it's either some kind of automotive type fluid that needs to go into these sections over here, and I'm pretty sure you would spill a drop or two, or at least that's my experience when working with heavy equipment and seeing heavy equipment in the field. Moving our way to the front fining compartment area, we have the 4 MG turrets, and they are not glued on. However, after all the layers of paint and varnish built up, they are on in a very snug manner. So much so that to pop them off, I'll probably need to use a tool, but I don't want to mess with them right now, so I'll just leave them be. However, this one here I was able to free up a little bit, and as you can see, I could go ahead and pivot them in a multitude of different directions. For the turret, this too can fully rotate, of course. And as I mentioned before, the turret does not have any sort of retention system whatsoever. It's held onto the tank purely with friction. If I go ahead and lift it off, you can see that the piece just pops off. If I was to do it again, I'd probably fabricate some kind of a magnet system, just as a way for, as a why not. I just like to have the turrets have some kind of retention system in place. Not that it's necessary or something, it's admittedly more or less a placebo effect, but it's something that if I was to do this kit again, I would definitely consider. And that's really all there is to mention about the stock details. Like I mentioned before, this model here, despite how big and how really detailed it is, build-wise it's very, very simplistic, and there's really not much to watch out for besides the areas that I already covered earlier in this video. Besides it being a exercise in deburring, it's really more or less an exercise in paint and weathering, and that's where this build really blossoms into its own. For the model's paintwork, of course, the entire model is first thoroughly spray painted with flat black El Cheapo spray paint. This does a great job with prepping the surface and allows any sort of type of paint to stick to it, be it my exterior latex house paint that I use on a large number of my builds, or even a more traditional modeling paint like the one I used on this one here. The color that I used, or I should say the paint that I used, was Tamiya acrylic, and the color specifically was black green. This color I utilize on many other of my British builds that have been seen on the channel in the past for a good reason. I do like the shade. It does a really good job of making the vehicles look very different compared to some of the other nationalities that I build vehicles for, be it either the Soviet Union or for the US. The paint is applied via the airbrush, and Tamiya paints always go on really, really well, and they airbrush very excellently. After the airbrushing was done with the base coat, it was then time to add the weathering. For the weathering, this one utilizes my typical, again, techniques with both airbrushing as well as dry brushing. For the airbrushing, I utilize a diluted cream for a wash, and this makes it have a more sun-faded, worn look to the surface. And I also use the airbrush to apply some diluted flat black into certain crevices to give it that counter shading look. One technique that I hate, I absolutely despise, and I don't use on any of my builds is pre-shading. That technique is just one that is just crazy to me. I don't like it. I like to add the shading after the base coat is done, and I have much more control over it compared to the other way around. And this again was done via the airbrush, and then after the airbrushing was done, I went ahead and gave it the distressed surface look with the dry brushing, and this again is a technique that I always reference in these videos. Aside from the dry brushing, the other technique that I cannot recommend enough, and it's really one that is basically custom tailored for this build over here, is the use of the Tamiya black panel line accent. I use that stuff on everything, but for this build over here, it takes to like a duck to water, and that's because of the subject matter. Because of all of these nooks and crannies, panel lines, rivets, buckles, you name it, this is absolutely excellent for that paint. That paint will just go in there and it'll just suck into all of these little recesses and panel lines, hovering around and circling around the rivets. It will highlight everything, and for a build like this that has more rivets on it than a New York City trestle system, this thing is going to be perfect for that paint. It really does make it look night and day different after the panel line accent is utilized. I mean, it is used on just about every single surface on this model, and that's why it has the look that you see here. After the weathering work was all done, this model was also thoroughly varnished with the VMS. Now, generally, I like to use this varnish on my builds that have decals on them because it does a great job with sealing the decal to the surface. However, for this build over here, there are no markings. There's no decal supplied with the set, and because this vehicle never entered into service or series production, it never had any unit markings or anything along those lines fitted in place. Obviously, this does open up lots of artistic licensing, and if you want to, you could throw desert rat markings on it and have your way with it. But for this one here, I just wanted a traditional A1E1 Independent, so it was left markingless. And even though it does not have any decals on it, I still went ahead and threw on the VMS because it just does a fantastic job with sealing the paint, and it just has this effect of making the models just look more polished. I absolutely love that product. I cannot recommend it enough, as I always shill for in these videos, but I'm doing it literally for the quality. I love this stuff. It works great. It's very rarely do you get to use something that's as advertised on the tin and it works out as advertised. So whenever that happens, it's always very noteworthy. In this case, the VMS is something that fits the bill. The VMS is applied via the airbrush. I just throw it on to the surface in one fell swoop, let the stuff dry, and then this here is the final aftermath of that. In the end, there's nothing more I could have wanted for this build over here. This was an excellent build, and I had an absolute blast working on it from start all the way to finish. Yes, it did have some growing pains originally from the project start. However, as I mentioned before, the vendor and the company came through, and with the great customer service that I was given, I was able to take the model and build it up to the condition that we have here. The base starter kit, besides it being a very interesting subject matter, the kit's execution is equally as excellent, and it just all comes together with the final end result that you see in front of you. which slides us conveniently into skill level and recommendation. So straight out of the get-go, if you are a beginner, I cannot recommend this kit to you. Even though the model's execution is fairly simplistic with mostly everything integrally 3D printed onto large sub-assemblies, this is the type of thing where if you are a novice with plastic models, this is definitely not going to be something that you can tackle. This does require some special skill sets with working with resin as well as with working with 3D prints that if you are just out of the gate new to plastic modeling in general, you're really not going to be able to take one of these kits and build it up and have a really good time doing so. On a similar note, if you are a intermediate builder, I can't necessarily recommend this kit to you, neither for some of the experienced builders out there. Specifically, if you are only exclusively used to working with injection molded polystyrene kits, this thing here is going to be outside your comfort level. This is again more akin to what I mentioned earlier, where it is like a full resin kit, and unless you've ever worked with full resin kits or have handled them in the past, you're not really going to have the skill sets with working with this material. If, however, you have a background with working with cast resin parts or 3D printed resin parts, then that changes everything, and then yes, I can definitely recommend this kit for you. If you have a background in working with those materials, this kit here is definitely a no-brainer and should be right there on the top of your to-do list. With the way the model is executed, there really isn't a whole lot of room that I see for improvement. This is in contrast to a lot of the other kits out there where even though the kit is excellent, a lot of times there may be an extra set of photo etch or some other type of accessory that can be added to it to further enhance it from the kit configuration. However, with this one over here, basically what you see is what you get, and for all intents and purposes, the kit is true to form to the real counterpart. So there's nothing really much more you can add to it. This one here, you can legitimately just open up the box, build it with the out-of-the-box contents, and for the most part, call it a day. And this drags us into recommendations. So this is where the kit does become fairly interesting. Because of the kit's subject matter, obviously I would recommend this kit for anyone who's an avid fan of British armor, as well as also World War I or interwar period armor as well. If you're the type of person that has in your collection the Tadpole, the Mark I, the Mark IV, all of the different genders that those vehicles come in, the FT-17, or even the Char 2C, this kit here would fit into that collection without any sort of problems. Along similar lines, if you're the type of person that digs the limited production or the experimental or prototype type tanks that were out there, this kit is highly recommended for you. If you're the type of person that has the M6 or the Norba-Fahrzeug, this kit here would also easily enhance that collection without any sort of issues. The next person who I would recommend this kit to is anyone who's just looking to build something different, okay? You know exactly what I'm referring to. If you're the type of person that has more Panthers than the San Diego Zoo, and you have a whole collection full of Shermans, and you're just looking for something that is off the beaten path, this kit here is going to be a very, very welcome addition to your collection. Briefly hopping back to before what I said about the type of person that likes the limited production or prototype type vehicles, lately there has been a resurgence in interest with vehicles like this one here, partially due in part to the online video games that are out there, be it either World of Tanks or War Thunder. Either one, I know that this tank here is in one of those. And with the popularity of these games, it really has brought and shined a light onto the lesser known and lesser appreciated vehicles that were produced in history or were even on the drawing board in some cases, and it has relit a fire of popularity for many of these vehicles. The Independent here is definitely included. If you're the type of person that loves to play those video games and has this vehicle in game, I'm pretty sure you're going to want to have one of these models into your collection as well. Again, you want to pump your brakes with the caveat that you have the proper building skills to put one of these together. If that's you and you got the skill sets to do it, this kit here is definitely going to be a no-brainer. The one final takeaway that I do have for this kit is with the technology that was used to produce it. This was the very first 3D printed full 1/35 scale kit that I've ever worked on. Of course, if anyone's a fan of this channel, you'll know that I've done lots of things with 3D print for my own builds, be it I designed my own 3D printed components in various materials, and I've also built full 3D printed models before in 1/72 scale. However, this is the first time that I got a chance to use and build something with this technology in 135. And this is definitely going to be the way of the future. I've seen lots of modern super kit companies out there, be it from Dragon or some of the other ones that have just recently come on the market, where they're giving you some very nice quality injection molded polystyrene kits. However, they're also now including 3D printed components made from basically the same material that this kit here is rendered in. This technology has come quite a ways in the last 10 or so years, to the point where it's basically almost on par now with injection molded polystyrene parts. And with quality this good, with price tags that are very affordable, this opens up a wide range of potential, and we're going to see lots of kits out there now offered in this material here that were just straight up ignored by the other manufacturers. Although the other manufacturers have been catching up in many ways, and that's excellent, but there's still so many wacky, weird vehicles out there that many companies may not necessarily want to tool up. And that is where the 3D printing companies here can swoop in and pick up the slack. After building this one over here, I've already purchased and built, by the time I'm filming this, a number of other kits from the same manufacturer, as well as from other manufacturers that are similar to this, and all these models, of course, will eventually make their debut on the channel when the time does come. But needless to say, this is definitely a very exciting time to be a armor modeler, and this is honestly the best, in my opinion, it's ever been. And if this kit here is a sign of things to come, we definitely have lots of really cool things to add to our collection in the near future. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this 1/35 scale British A1E1 Independent Heavy Tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a fantastic way to keep in the loop of new posted content, being 1/35 scale model showcase videos like this one over here, or the other smaller and larger scale model showcase videos and project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as photographs of the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. See you there.